So here we are again, ready for Coffee Pods. Good to be back with you, Wes.
Yeah, gosh, 2 weeks flies by quickly, doesn't it?
It certainly does, coming to the end of November.
Oh, how many days to Christmas? Oh no, no, we won't
Oh
do
no,
that.
don't get me started. We're actually going to explore a question that got sent in to us
Okay.
through the Academy. I'm pretty sure it came through the Academy. Well, yes, we were looking at chronic and long-term illness a while ago.
Yeah, we were.
And you presented a list, and it was not everything was included on it, but
No.
you presented a list of different chronic and long-term illnesses, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
And it had on there, did it have was it autism?
Yeah, yeah.
Which was really surprising, not only to us doing the event, but to a couple of our guests as well.
Mm,
And so
mm,
what they were then wondering is, are we supposed to pray for autism or other
mm.
disabilities that may have been listed on the sheet? So I just wondered, Wes,
Yeah.
do we? Is this something that needs healing?
That's a great question, isn't it? Is it something that needs healing?
Mm,
Um, it's a really interesting question because part of it is perspective in the
mm,
sense that um I've known some people who are, for instance, have been ready to die and to meet Jesus.
mhm.
And actually they say, and honestly, they sort of know that their time is coming, and they don't want you to pray for healing. They want to pray that the train arrives quicker and that, whatever. And so in a sense, just generally people say, how do you pray in moments like that? And I say, well, the question is the person coming to me, do they have faith to live, or are they looking for peace to die?
Right.
Okay. And actually I think it's a tantamount expression of respect that we respond to them in that way. So for instance, I would never pray for somebody in a way that they weren't able to accept or didn't want me to over anything,
Okay.
because actually that's not the nature of the dignity that we give people in Acorn, in the ministry that we have.
Yeah.
So for instance, Jesus will say to Bartimaeus, what do you want me to do for you? To another man, in fact, a man who is chronically ill, 38 years constitutes chronic.
Yeah.
Okay. He says, do you want to get well?
Yeah.
So there's a something here that, and I think perhaps one of the issues that comes out of the question you just asked me is about our assumptions and presumptions that we make in this ministry. Okay, if I come back specifically to the autism thing, it wasn't my list. I must really confess.
Yeah.
I did consult a medical journal on what is classified as long-term or chronic illnesses, and it wasn't that autism in that sense was listed as a disease that you needed to get rid of, but actually the list was about chronic long-term illnesses are conditions which either you, somebody else, or the National Health Service are going to have to handle long
Right.
term.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not saying that, it's not saying that if somebody is autistic, that there is something wrong with them,
Yeah.
because actually the trouble is we don't really understand the mind that much. I mean, we think we do, but we don't. And there is such a lot going on in people's understanding and people's experience
Mm.
that perhaps the people who would regard themselves as what's the word? It's the there's a great phrase about what's regarded as normal sensory reception.
Sure. Yeah.
But actually, who's to say that that's normal?
Yeah.
I mean, people have looked at me and thought you're definitely not normal. So the list wasn't about these are things that are wrong with people that we need to sort out. The
Yeah.
list was about these are conditions that people will have that somebody, including them, are going to have to manage throughout their life, or at
Yeah.
least over the period of the condition. So if
That's
I
a
could,
really helpful way of putting it.
if I could qualify that's better.
Yeah.
And of course, in that sense, you would then take the issue of disability.
Yeah.
Just because somebody is in a wheelchair doesn't mean that they're unhappy about being in a wheelchair. And the answer actually is not always no.
Yeah.
Some people might not
Yeah.
be happy about it, but some people are content. And I remember listening to somebody who said, I know it sounds strange, but the wheelchair is part of my life now.
Mm.
It's the way it's the how I see life here. That's how it works. And actually, who am I to say you're wrong, or even less, to pray against their will?
Mm.
So I think in relation specifically to autism, the thing I have learned is this. In the story of Bartimaeus, he wasn't autistic, but in the story of Bartimaeus, he is blind,
Yeah.
okay, but his spirit can see,
Yeah.
because they tell him it's Jesus of Nazareth, but he says, no, it's Jesus, son of David.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question is this. It's true for conditions like autism or even dementia. I was with somebody just last week who's got dementia, but when we began to pray, his mind came in line with his spirit, and he was absolutely there as if he didn't have dementia, just
Yeah.
in those moments. And almost as soon as we said amen, the switch went off, and
Oh,
he was back
wow.
there. And it actually happened for my own mum as well. So
Mm.
what I want to say is that God communicates spirit to spirit as well as mind to mind. So
Mm.
just because your mind might not necessarily work in the way that everybody else's doesn't mean there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. And it
Because
makes
that's,
me think of what you were saying before, in the academy last month, I think it was, or the month before, that God wants us well and whole,
yeah,
and that whole is different for everybody.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I know what whole looks like for me, but
Yeah.
I couldn't tell what whole looks like for you. And
Yeah.
neither could I tell what whole looks like for somebody who's lost a limb, or
Mm.
somebody who is journeying with cancer.
Mm.
Um, you know, I know it's easy to make, that's where we make assumptions, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so on that point of assumptions then, because I think that that's getting me thinking what other people might think or do in situations, ministry situations around ministering to people who appear different to us possibly.
Hmm.
um how do you think the church does see something like autism, or ministering to people with autism?
Okay, I'm going to make a huge sweeping generalization, and
Okay, yeah.
people are going to write in. Okay, so please forgive me. I mean this, but by and large, I think the church is afraid of a number of things.
Yeah.
I think the church is afraid of dementia. I think it's afraid of Alzheimer's. I think it's afraid of people who are different to us. I think it's afraid of autism. I know some great churches
Yeah.
who have wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ministries with people with autism or learning difficulties and children. Absolutely
Mm.
stonking ministries and provision. I know one church that has built into their project, into their new building project, a state-of-the-art sensory room
Oh, wow.
for children. It is I mean, I went in it, it's just brilliant. Just as it's got lights, it's got everything, textures, the lot.
Yeah.
Okay, but also, like the church used to be afraid of death. If
Mm.
somebody dies, people try and avoid the subject. They don't talk about the person, which we've learned is actually the very thing that people want you to do. They want you to talk about the person.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that if we're not careful, we sort of give the impression that the church is about perfect people, when actually it's not. We're all quirky, and I'm probably as quirky as anybody is. In fact, people think more so. Life may not be perfect, but it is livable.
Mm.
And I think also that, in a sense, the church is at times particularly ignorant
Yeah.
about it. And even if you take something like ADHD,
Yeah.
I think the church is by and large ignorant about what that means. I remember going to I was at a church, and there was a little boy. He must have been 10, and he was wearing a harness and a padded helmet, and he was just wired, and he was just everywhere. And in fact, I was preaching there, and at one point he came and stood next to me at the front, and his poor mother was like, "Oh my goodness me!" I said, "Don't worry, it's okay." You know, I said, "I got a microphone. It's fine. It'll be all right." You know. And he went off, and he was everywhere. And I said to her afterwards, I said, "This must be quite challenging for you." And she said, "He's lovely." She said, "It's the church that is challenging." And I said, "Do tell." She said, "Well, this is one of the number of churches I've tried, and this is the only church that I've stayed at more than 2 weeks." So I said, "Why? What happened?" They say, "Well, we go in on week one, the first day, and they welcome and say, 'Oh, it's absolutely lovely to have you. You know, great that you'd come. Please come make us at home,' you know," and he's there and whatever. And then when I go back week 2, somebody's at the door waiting for me. And they say, "Would it be possible if you could just keep him quiet? And actually, if he's disturbed, could you just take him out the back and maybe play out there?" And she knows, I know what they're saying. "Please don't come back. You're disrupting our church." And actually, I almost cried, and I apologized to her. I said, "I am so sorry. This isn't what Jesus is like." And she said, "But this church, I've been here for 3 months." And they just go, "Yeah, right, okay, next, let's move on."
Great, that's great.
So I think the church is ignorant. I think we're afraid. I think we're ill prepared. And I think, and I say to somebody who's involved in prayer ministry, you know, there's this idea that one prayer should sort everything out. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a journey and whatever. So
absolutely.
What do you think?
I agree with what you're saying. I do. I think I think we need to create inclusive spaces for everybody. And I think we need to educate ourselves as much as possible as well. You know, it's one thing to go to like Bible college, but you also need, I think you need to have some common sense to go. You know, I'm not saying not everyone has
life college.
Life college, yeah. And just, I think if there's people within our ministry context who have some skills in these areas that can just contribute and bring some understanding, because I think a lot of it with some of the stuff you've listed as well, you know, dementia, is because we don't understand, we can put up our fear barriers. I mean, we've got family who are severely autistic, and we would always say we'd never change them for the world. And I've really learned as well, just that I know God can speak to that person as clearly as he can speak to anybody else. And understanding that that's a difference, but it's not a bad difference. Like that's just a difference in how God can communicate.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's incredibly there's a lot to think about when it comes to this, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And I mean, you know, we, in our wider family, we have one of our wider family is ADHD, and the world looks very different to them. And I think in a sense, you know, isn't it funny that church, we try and take in account of ages, you know, different chronological ages, you know, the old children's work, this, we don't actually often cater for different personality types. So you know, we treat everybody the same. I don't know about you, sometimes I don't want to go into a church and have a full brass band at me, you know, for 40 minutes. You know, it's a different thing. I learned a brilliant lesson. It was just great. I was at early on in the ministry, I was at a conference. I've been brought in as part of the prayer ministry team and whatever. And the well-known speaker had spoken at the front. I won't mention their name, but he was male. He then gave an invitation to come and pray. So if you'd like to come forward, the team are here. If you'd like to be prayed for, whatever. It's very similar to perhaps Acorn things. I remember praying for somebody, and the next person, excuse me, in the line was a young man with Down syndrome. And I said, would you like me to pray for you? And he said, no, thank you. I want to be prayed for by, and he pointed to
Oh,
the
did
man
he?
at the front. And I said, no, I perfectly understand. And actually, if I was in your, I would choose the same thing if I was being prayed for, But actually, somebody else could have been highly offended.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually, there just weren't the filters which said, actually, it's not polite to say no, thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
You're
Yeah.
rubbish. I'd
Yeah.
want someone better, And of course, he probably didn't even think that, but it was just the way that came across. And I
Yeah.
do think you're right, Lisa, that for all of these issues, that people with chronic and long-term illness, people with disabilities, people with autism, people with ADHD have something to teach us about how God reaches the spirit and the imagination
Yeah.
when the mind doesn't necessarily always cooperate in the way
Yeah.
that perhaps we think it might.
Definitely. I've sometimes wondered, and this might be completely, no, Lisa, that's wrong, but I have sometimes wondered, like, if you take the story where Jesus drew in the sand, didn't he? Um, that just one time spoke to me as like, what if that's how that person needed to see something? Or and I'm not saying that's exactly what happened in that situation, but actually, like, so when we pray for people, our go-to is to use words and to listen.
Yeah.
When actually, what if it is you need to physically demonstrate, or to help communicate to
Yeah.
that person. So yeah, I just wonder how God does
Yeah.
it. It's amazing he talks to us, and he talks to me differently to how he talks to you.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So he's going to
totally.
talk. Yeah, it's just, yeah, it's
And
amazing.
and of course, many of the prophets, they acted it out.
Mm.
I mean, seriously, I mean, some of them, and honestly, some of it is weird, and please don't do it in church, but absolutely seriously, I mean, they absolutely acted it out.
Yeah.
And it really is quite something, to see that. And I think that's part of it. And I've got the word. It's the people who are neurotypical and neuroatypical.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
before you write in and correct me, and of course, the church is by and large for neurotypical people, not necessarily neuroatypical people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
And it's also for more or less one personality type very often.
Yeah.
So I honestly think, if somebody who was autistic asked me to pray for them, I would pray, and I would ask them what they would like me to pray for. But I would never presume with anything that is not typical, if I could put it that way. I'd
Yeah.
never presume to tell a person what they need.
Oh, definitely. That's very helpful. Okay. I was going to say, or ask also, how we can keep hope in these moments, when there's people that we love, and circumstances aren't changing, or there's a recurring need, which I wouldn't necessarily put autism down as
No.
something like that, but just in those situations, maybe the chronic illnesses. What do you think?
I have great sympathy for those who are journeying with long-term issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think I remember listening to Terry Waite. He was the man who was held in captive for years in Beirut. And I remember him saying, he was interviewed and he said, what did you pray? Because you're a Christian. What did you pray? And he said, I realized that if I started to pray, dear God, rescue me, get me out of here, if that became my only prayer, I would go mad.
Oh.
He said, so I never asked for that. He said, what I did is I recited the Anglican prayers for the day. He said, I'd learned them by heart over many years, and I just went through the Anglican cycle of prayer, because for me, that was the place where there was life and hope. Whereas actually, if I only ever prayed about the thing that I wanted to change, there was only despair because I couldn't change that. And I would say to people in this sort of circumstance, that yes, you might say, God, my needs, but actually sometimes it's just better to focus on him and say, Lord, I know that you love me. That's true. I know that you're with me. That's true. I know that you care for me. That's true. I know that your help will be with me today. That's true. Rather than say, I want this necessarily today.
Yeah, yeah.
And I will end with quoting my mother, who's gone to be the Lord, whatever. And she used to say to me, she said, the world's gone mad, and there's only you and me, and I'm not that sure about you. And what she was saying, in a sense, who determines what is normal?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that. Oh, no, I am quite sure that God doesn't call normal everything that we call normal.
No, of course not.
And actually, I just wonder how much of the church is slightly out of kilter with what reality looks like anyhow. So I would just say we are all fearfully and wonderfully made. Find the good in that.
Amazing. Thank you, Wes. That's brilliant. Okay, let's draw it to a close. Thank you for joining us. Do check out our website for all sorts of different resources and events. And also, if you make sure that you subscribe and like these podcasts, you'll be notified whenever there is a new one. So definitely worth doing. And we'll catch you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.